You're a startup founder. You think your product is amazing and feel like more people should be buying, but the road is long and slow. It feels like you're stuck. There's always one thing I ask startup founders. Have you talked to your customers? They almost always say, heck yes, we talk to our customers all the time. But what I find is they're either selling or trying to improve their product. These are not customer-focused conversations. If we can get curious about our customers, then we can uncover critical insights that will help us build to the next round. I'm Anna Firmenov, and welcome to Building with Buyers, a show about startup growth where I'll explore how customers help startups build to the next round. Welcome to the Building with Buyers podcast. I am sitting here talking to someone that I didn't realize I'd ever be talking to you, Bob.
What does that mean?
Well, because sometimes I read books by people and then later on I'm like, I need to get them on the show. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it just feels like a surreal moment. Like you're almost like a star for me.
Well, I'm not that. I'll say this. I always say I'm a dyslexic, illiterate child that's very neurodiverse. So it's one of those things where I'm just a regular person, to be honest.
Yeah, I know, but you're curious, right? And I think that's at the heart of everything that you do. And so we were just catching up before I pressed record. I want to make sure I'm saying your last name right. Moesta or
That's
Moesta?
Correct. Thank
Moesta.
you. Moesta, right? That's
Bob
it.
Moesta.
That's it.
So, Bob, this is really awesome to have you on the show. You're an entrepreneur, an innovator, known for your jobs to be done theory. Started 8 companies. Are you on your 9th company?
I'm at 10 right now, but yeah.
10. Okay, 10 companies.
I can't help it. Like you said, I get curious and then I don't see anything and I don't have anybody to help, so I got to start my own.
Makes sense. And you're currently the co-founder of the Rewired Group. Yeah. Also, by the way, you're teaching at Kellogg's Executive MBA program. So And so that I think is really cool because, well, you don't like full-time students apparently, which I was one, but that's okay.
Full-time students are hard because I believe that they're trying to learn without context.
Yeah.
And I believe that, and if you know anything about me, it's context creates value. Yeah. And when you devoid people of context, it's hard to actually have any answers of anything.
Yeah.
To me, I like the working MBAs and I like the executive ed because they get to go apply what I talk about right after I'm done.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I probably asked a ton of convoluted questions like, what if this happens and then that happens? And but I'm beyond that now. So
yeah, but there's good questions. But once you're in a problem, understanding the problem, a really good problem is like 50% solved. So the fact is that when you're talking about imagined problems, they're really hard to really actually figure out.
Yeah, totally.
So,
your books, Jobs to Be Done, which it keeps coming up. Like it's been coming up with my conversations from the prior show that I did, Modern Startup Marketing. Yeah. It's happening now, recording conversations with B2B founders. So I am so happy that I have the person that came up with this theory.
There was a lot of us to help build it. But yes, I would consider myself one of the architects of.
One of the architects. Yeah, it's really exciting to have you on the show. You also wrote Learning to Build. Yes. You also wrote Demand Side Sales, which I have that one. Yes. And like I said, I did not realize that one day you'd be on my show.
That's
and
great.
Then Job Moves is your latest one. And we might talk about that towards the end of the episode. But
perfect.
You are the perfect person to have on my show, Building with Buyers. I'm exploring the role that customers play in helping startups build to the next round. Yeah. And so people have been talking about jobs to be done, this approach. And to be honest with you, like when I came up with my approach back when I started up my business in 2020, I didn't read Jobs to Be Done. I was thinking back, like, how did I come up with my interview document that I use for my clients when I do these customer interviews? And I can't pinpoint it. So maybe part of it was from your book, Demand Side Sales. Maybe it was.
No, I think there's a lot of stuff in the wild. What I get a lot is what I end up doing is just putting language to stuff that is intuitive to a lot of founders. And so what you start to realize is, and the other thing is to me is you talked about like a question guide. Like I don't even have a question guide. I don't believe in a question guide. I believe you just need to have a conversation and you need a framework to fill the data in. And so it's one of these things where, first of all, I'm an engineer, and I would tell you, my mom would tell you I was an engineer out of the womb. I was breaking things by the time I was 2. I was fixing things by the time I was 5, because at some point I want to get out of trouble. But I've been always kind of building and making and putting things together since very, very young. And so the thing that really got to me was in college, they told me something. I feel like they brainwash engineers in college to say, you're the smartest, you can do anything, you're always right, you got to be that. And the reality is like, the one thing there's a lot of things they told me, but one thing they told me was build it and they will come. And that's just a freaking lie. Like it just does not happen that way. And so what happens is I end up building product that I want for me, and it turns out that nobody else wants it. Or I end up assuming I know what customers want, and so I end up doing it, and then, or I go ask them, and then I go build it, and they go like, yeah, kind of, but that's not really it. And I realized I didn't have any idea what people were talking about. And so I went and learned criminal and intelligence interrogation, because I realized most customers are lying to you and lying to themselves about what they really need. And so you have to actually learn how to filter past what I call the pablum of how people talk, to getting down to what's the causation behind what caused you to say, today's the day I need a new CRM, or today's the day I need a new learning management system. Like nobody randomly buys any of this stuff, and it's all caused, but none of us treat it as if it's a causal event. And so that's where, like, you might have a list of questions. I'm not even smart enough to put down the questions to ask. I literally just go talk to people who have recently bought a new learning management system, and go like, what happened? How did your old one decide that it needed to leave? And how did you decide on this new one? And I extract the story, and then I code it to help me understand how they buy things. And so it's the buying aspect that actually most people don't really understand, because they think that sales and buying are the same thing, but they're actually not the same thing at all.
Great point. Yeah, because like sales is very company centric.
That's right.
That's what we do.
I call that the supply side of the world, right?
Yeah,
The thing I want to build, the thing I want to do, we want sales to run this way. And when you really study sales, you realize that the person who's in most charge of sales is finance. Because how does it come out that I can actually give a 20% discount by the end of the quarter because we're not meeting our numbers? I can't give a 20% discount any other time. It turns out because haven't predicted the equations that I used to predict the cash flow didn't turn out right. So we're better off actually closing things. But otherwise, you start to realize that we actually line up a way to sell that actually never corresponds to how people want to buy.
Yeah, you didn't have to give them that discount. Like you just had to uncover what job did they want done.
Well, what I would say is, what are they struggling with?
Yeah.
And ultimately, what are the outcomes they want? And what are the anxieties that they have wrapped around it? And so we have to look at the fuel of the change, but we have to also analyze the friction of the change and realize that there's things you have to do that might have nothing to do with your product, but actually help people make progress, right? So like one of the things I did is I built houses. And I built houses for basically first-time home buyers. I built 1,000 homes here in Detroit. I built basically everything from condos to single-family homes, all that kind of stuff. And one of the places I built was for downsizers, like your parents, right? And the reality is like at some point you start to say, like, what causes your parents to say today's the day that they want to move? It's not random. It's like stuff accumulates, right? All of a sudden, the house is way bigger than they need. You've moved away or they're not close. The fact is the stairs start to become an issue because you got to take the stuff, the laundry up and down, or you got to clean the gutters. It's like, we should do something about this, but it's not random. And then you start to realize, well, what do they want? And we end up building this very cool single story ranch condo that basically would have first floor laundry, would have a gourmet kitchen, would have 2 bedrooms. And ultimately, every time somebody would look at it, they say they love it. But there's a whole bunch of anxieties that are wrapped around it. Like, what do I do with my 40 years of stuff that's in the house? Like, what do I do with the dining room table? And you start to realize that I actually had to start to include, like, for example, moving and storage with my move. When you bought a house from me, I would actually include moving and storage. It increased my sales 22%. Right? But I'm a builder. But as a builder, like, why should I be doing moving? The guy across the street is selling, free granite and stainless steel appliances, and I'm literally going free moving, and I'm killing them. And to the point where they're like, what are you doing that's so different? And ultimately, I realized, like, my job I wasn't about building homes. My job was actually helping people move from one house to another. And ultimately, how do they help them decide to say today's the day they want to move to my house or my condo, which, by the way, is in the middle of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that kind of thinking that really kind of helped me kind of foster this. So I've been doing this since the early 90s, and I've done this in food, I've done this in software, I've done it in weapons systems and like just all education systems, all these different things. And ultimately it's this concept that people don't buy things, they hire them to make progress in their life. And if you can actually understand the progress they're trying to make, you can actually build a product that's way better for them than being the best product ever from an engineering perspective.
Okay, I want to dig into the jobs to be done, like the actual process that you
Yeah.
said. I don't have to write the questions down. I just go and I talk and I have a conversation.
So I have two frameworks that what I try to do is when I'm talking to somebody, the frameworks are ways that capture the information that help me get the story. So the first framework is called the forces of progress. And it's trying to understand there's basically four forces that cause people to change. One is there's a push of the situation, typically framed as a when this is happening to me. And so typically for people to buy your product, there's stuff that has to happen to them to make them ready to value your product. And so part of it is you have to dig around to understand like what happened to them to realize today's the day. The first thing is I want to take one step back is I never start this by talking to people who want my product. I only talk to people who have bought my product or bought a competitor of my product so I can understand they've already been through the process, because the people who've been through the process had to make trade-offs. The people who haven't bought yet haven't made any trade-offs. And so what happens is they're going to say, oh my God, they would tell you as the home builder, oh, I want granite, I want this, but when I looked at who bought what, they would actually rather have buying in a finished basement than basically have granite. And so if you really talk to them about the real behavior they do, that's what the key is. The other part is that you're not actually having them project what they want. It's just an investigation about what they actually already did and the decisions they already made. And so we're using the past to understand the variables that have to be part of their life in order to actually enable them to make the change.
Can I ask you a question here?
You can make, I'm just flowing. So
How do you trust people? Do you think that people actually know why they make decisions?
No.
Because this is like something that I think about all the time.
Yes.
And I have asked multiple people, and the answer that I've gotten, which I'm not satisfied with, is that people, especially in B2B, are not going to lie to you. Like, process is not emotional. They're not going to lie to you. Like, it's pretty logical, their decision making.
So first of all, it's very emotional and they lie all the time.
That's what I thought, Bob.
Here's the thing is what happens is people don't connect the dots. Like if you talk about like, why'd you buy a new car? It's like, oh, I got a deal on it. That's what they're saying. But the reality is like, no, the old car had 80,000 miles on it. I had 3 repairs on it. The fact is it's got a cracked windshield. I just had 2 babies. I got to basically, it's like a whole bunch of other things going on. And so people try to simplify that process. And I call that pablum. People try to actually get you to answer the question as quickly as possible with the simplest answer to stop the questions because they really don't know. And then what happens is you ask them, you go say, well, give me like, so like my daughter will come home from work and she'll say, oh, I'll say, did you have a good, how was your day? And she'll say, good. Good is like, what does that mean? Right. And then you move to the next level down. So I call that first level pablum. The next layer down is what I call fantasy nightmare level. Well, what does good mean? Oh my God, it was so good and they go too big or they go too like, oh my God, it was so bad. And and then there's like, okay, what really happened to cause you to say it was a good day or a bad day? And when you get down to this causal layer, it's literally like a game of dominoes. It's things that have to happen that go in place. And as human beings, we don't think about time that way. We think about very specific slices of time, but we don't ever connect things through time. And so half the time when you do these interviews, they're like, oh my God, I did that. And then I did this. And then you start to play back the story and it's like a therapy session for them. And it's not that they're lying to you. It's that they didn't remember, or the fact is that they've never taken the time to reflect and connect the dots on it.
Reflection is not something people do normally about when they purchase things, right?
That's correct. Unless there's some reason for it. And so this is where when I pay somebody, like we're doing interviews of why people went into an educational program. And you start to realize there was a whole bunch of things and they're very busy. And it's like, why in the world did you add this on top of it? And they're like, well, because I didn't have these other things going on and I couldn't have access to these classes. And And to be honest, it was virtual and I could do it at night. And all of a sudden you started to realize like there's all these things that had to be like lined up to make sure that they could actually get into this program. Now, the people running the program had no idea all of this stuff had to happen, right? And so this is where founders believe that they believe what customers say, which is the one or two things that they say, oh, I bought it because you were the best, you were the fastest, you were the cheapest, whatever it is. But that's never the reason. It's sets of what I call sets of causes. And so there's these pushes around context.
Yeah.
The other part is there's this pull, which is what were they hoping for when they did it? What were they being able to do that they couldn't do today because they didn't have this product? And that's what we call the fuel of the change. And so the push and the pull become like the two ends of the spectrum, right? And ultimately, the solution fits between those two things because the solution becomes the reason to believe and it actually becomes the way in which to get to the outcomes. But there's two other forces that are actually part of this that actually inhibit change. We call it the friction, which is the anxiety of the new. So as you start to think about what they're going to do, it's like, oh my God, I love this. I love this. I love this. Yeah, but I've got a contract with somebody else on this other learning management system, or, what do we do with all our data? Or how long is it going to take to train people to get them up to speed? And you start to realize they don't tell you that stuff, but that's the stuff that's in their head. And so if you walk them through somebody who bought, you can actually say, so what were you worried about? And then they'll give you a list of things they were worried about that actually everybody who's buying from you is worried about, but they don't tell you that. And so when you start to actually address those things like, how am I going to move? The moment the thing is I would have people buy my houses and they'd literally cancel 6 weeks later because they'd try to clean out a closet or two and they would go through 3 boxes of Kleenex and they'd realize like that they're never going to be able to do this. And the moment I'd say, well, what if I actually moved you and packed you and then gave you a place to sort your stuff when the kids came to visit? They're like, really? I'm like, yep, 22% increase in sales. Right. So these are the kinds of things that you have to do. The last one is the habit, which is that most of the time when you try to do something new, you have to give up something from the past. And so you have to spend the time to really understand what were they willing to give up in order to get. And so if you get those 4 forces, the pushes, the pulls, the anxieties, and the habits they had to give up, you can then frame the solution you need to actually provide.
Yeah.
And as an engineer, I was always taught you need to have a solution, and then you actually got to go find people who have the problem. And what I've learned working on, like I said, 3,500 products, the reality is I go find people who have a problem and then go design a solution to fit into their life. It's way easier.
That makes sense. Can we get a little tactical here? So I also have conversations with customers and I've always tried to make them better. It's like, it's a skill because you can interview a customer and then you get this information and it's crap. And then you're feeding it into the company and then more crap comes out, right?
It's too high. We end up trying to find the themes between all the stories. And the reality is one of the tricks is every story is intact and is true. But when you start to try to find themes between them, they actually don't become true anymore. And so part of it is I literally, I'll do one interview and I'll connect the dots and I put it to the side. And then I do another interview and I connect it. I'm not actually mixing any previous stories with the next stories. I'm literally end up with, and to be honest, all I need is 10 stories. If I get 10 stories.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
It's in 10 is where because it's very fundamental. This is not statistics. This is math. And what I mean by that is the fact is I'm trying to find fundamental variables that have to be part of people's lives in order to make these changes. And so all I'm really changing is that, and all I'm interviewing is people who've literally bought this thing or literally have done something different and say like, all right, what happened and how'd that happen? And when you actually get those stories, you can then lay them on top of each other and say like, these two stories seem very similar and this one seems really different. And so you end up realizing like, there's not one way to get to your product and there's not a million ways to get to your product, but it turns out there's 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 ways. And what you start to realize is that they're very, very different in terms of kind of like value proposition and kind of what they're willing to pay and a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, but let me ask you this, Bob. So when you're an early stage startup, you can't have 5 ways you talk to people.
No, that's right.
You need to have one way. And so what I try to do then is make sure that we figure out like who's our best fit customer of the customers we have. Let's talk to people with that. They have similar work, right? They have similar goals. They have similar challenges. They probably have similar experiences they would with the product. So that the stories, as I put them one on top of the other, I can find the common thread.
That's right.
That,
but to realize the ones that you need to ignore, because if there's 5 different ways and you can't do 5 different ways, it's kind of
right.
like, so for example, I work with a company called InVideo, not NVIDIA, InVideo, and they basically do video editing. And they have basically a very simple platform to help you do TikTok and Instagram and do videos very quickly. And it turns out that they had like 3 sets of customers. One set of customers like, I don't know anything about this. Help me create a video fast and easy and teach me how to do it. To these people who are like, I know everything about video, but help me just save time because you can actually create the videos faster than anybody else. And it turns out that they had both of them as their customer. They ended up building personas about all these different people. And they started to realize like every time they built a feature for one segment, they'd actually piss off the other segment. And so they were constantly going back and forth. And the moment that they actually kind of realized like, look, the higher end segment that is sophisticated and using us to save us for time, there are very few of them. And the fact is they have the largest voice. And the people who basically are at the lowest end, if I make it easier and easier for people, the fact is like the higher end people aren't going to like it, but the lower end people are like, oh, I can do this. And they went from basically no users to 25 million users in 7 months. And so part of it was being able to understand that separation and to focus and to decide to focus on that and to abandon the higher end market and ignore the complaints they got around that kind of stuff. And so part of this is, as a startup, you've got to focus, but you have to realize, how do you actually address the things that people say they want, but they don't. And so to me, it's that notion of knowing what are the 3 or 4 ways to do it. And then ultimately, which one are we going to use as the beachhead that we're going to land on and then move from, right?
Yeah. One of the things I try to do in my conversations is to dig deeper. So if somebody comes back and says, and like if I ask, like, why did you choose this product? Like, what's the value you're getting? And they're like, oh, helps me move faster, or it's cheaper, or one of those.
Yes.
Then I try to dig deeper and ask further questions. Like,
you have to.
Yeah.
Because the thing is there's 22 dimensions of easy. There's 7 dimensions of speed. Like there's all these different ways in which people are taking. Like one, I was doing an interview last week and somebody said like, it's got to be faster. It's too slow. It's got to be faster. And like, what do you mean by faster? And they're like, well, look, when we're doing this part, people are just sitting around waiting. I'm like, but that's not faster. Like, no, I need them to basically not be waiting. I'm like, okay. So all we did was we started to give them other information to be doing while they were waiting. And they're going like, God, thanks for making it faster. And so this is the crazy part is I always talk about 2 kinds of problems. A dictionary problem. We have the same word, but we have completely different definitions of it. And most product problems and marketing problems are literally a dictionary problem, because we don't understand what they mean by it. And if I literally have, you have a team, a cross-functional team, listen to the words that you do your interviews through, everybody actually hears something completely different. So every time we do one of these interviews, I have at least 7 people there listening in. And then we spend an hour after the interview arguing about what we actually heard, because it gets everybody on the same page. And you start to realize that we can't say the word easy anymore, because there's easy to install, there's easy to train, and then there's easy to actually put the data in. And there are very different definitions of easy. And most people stop when they say, oh, they want it easy. Okay, I got it. It's never that easy.
What's the most important question that needs to be part of your process of having these conversations?
Every time they talk about the product, you need to take a step back. What I mean by that, they'll say, oh my God, I love this feature. And people go, oh, tell me about this feature. And you're going to like, no, tell me what this feature can help you do that you couldn't do before. You want to get it to the outcome that they want, because of the outcome, there might be 5 different ways you can get to that outcome. But so I did some work with a company called Basecamp, right? And one of the things we ended up realizing that people kept asking for a calendar. And every time they ask for a calendar, it's like what? Well, I want a calendar. I want a calendar. And finally, they're like, all right, we should probably go build a calendar. But before we do that, let's go talk to people about what they want in a calendar, because it's a big project. And it's like, you've got Google, you've got Outlook. Like, why do you need another calendar? And what we found is that what people were asking a calendar for is because in Basecamp, it'll tell you when you have things due, when you have meetings set up, but it doesn't tell you when you have free time or things to schedule. And so all we ended up doing is realizing that as we interviewed people about it, it's like, I was trying to book this conference room and I couldn't figure out when it was available, because it's a resource on Basecamp, but it's like, I know when all the meetings are, but I don't know when the meetings aren't. And so we just literally created an inverse. So we took everything that was there and said, oh, you want to see availability? And we literally flipped it around and said, here's when it's available. It took us 2 weeks to do it. And it literally, everybody said, thank you for the calendar. Right.
Yeah, that's a
And
great.
so this is the thing is like customers don't know what features are. They don't know the technology. And when they start to talk about the technology too much, the fact is they're talking about the solution. And ultimately, they're not trying to buy a solution. They're trying to buy an outcome. And if we can get them to the outcome they want, then we can actually help them figure it out.
Yeah. How do you tie that back to business growth? So like you have this conversation with
Yes.
customers, and then you need to get everybody aligned on certain words, certain phrases, certain value props, right?
That's right. Yep.
How do you?
That's half of it, because half of it is I need to know how to get more people in. The other part I have to do is I have to actually understand churn, because the same reason why people come is the same reason why, not necessarily the exact same, but it's the process we use is exactly the same to figure out why people leave. They aren't randomly leaving. There's something happening to them. It causes them to switch from AT&T to Verizon. And so the only way I really get growth is if I get more people in and I get less churn. And so you have to be able to do both. And you have to understand the reason why some people come is not the reason why they stay. Right?
Interesting. So
they might come because, for example, they might come for a feature or two. So for example, in QuickBooks, the reason why people come to QuickBooks is they either like what causes somebody to buy a new accounting system or any accounting system or just finally get an accounting system, right? It's one of three things. It's the fact that I'm having problems getting paid. My invoice system, I have invoices I did on Word, and I try to run it through my checking account, but it's like, it gets too confusing. I don't know who paid me what. The other thing is paying other people. You start to, again, use your bank to do that. But at some point in time, you realize like, okay, I need a way in which to understand how much I owe these other people. And the third one is taxes, right? QuickBooks does 1,000 things besides that. But the reality is what they did is they said, look, we're only going to focus on these three things to help people come to us, because once they come in, it's like they have a list of all the things they can fix.
Yep.
Get rid of those, and then all of a sudden the list goes up, and it's like, hey, you got payroll. I can help you with payroll. Payroll. Oh my God, insurance. You can help me with insurance. And all of a sudden, like it now can do 50 other things for you. But if you try to tell them it can do 50 things up front, they're going to go like, I don't need all that. I just need this little piece.
Yeah.
So part of this is to realize like you need to understand, again, this is why we talk about it's the progress people are trying to make.
Right.
And the struggling moment is the seed that causes them to make a change.
Yep.
And if you actually have to study, what I do for a living now is I just study people's struggling moments and then look for where there's no solution at all.
Yeah. And then you'll invest in that or build a company there. Yeah.
That's where I build a company. And so my thing is most people don't realize that the greatest competitor to most B2B software is Excel and the intern. Right. And they're thinking it's like, it's this other big thing. It's like, no.
Status quo, I guess. Right.
That's right. It's the status quo.
Yeah.
Exactly
I talk about that all the time.
So one thing that's different about these interviews is I'm studying the transition from one state to a new state. Yep. I'm not talking to them about their business. I'm not talking about them. I'm not trying to do demographics. I'm literally trying to understand what caused them to change their behavior, because growth only comes when people do new behavior and only when customers innovate. And so I've been studying how customers innovate, which then helps me build how I should change my product.
So my original question was like, what's the most important question to ask? But I think it's not just a question to ask. It's a theme to understand.
That's right.
What caused them to change? What was the reason for that? And I think that is, you ask a few questions, you dig deeper. There is no one question, but as long as you understand that theme, would you agree then that you could use that for your website?
So the way that I think about it is I'm actually doing an understudy role. I feel like this is more of like theater. Like I need to be them in this when I'm at the product table or I'm at the marketing table. And so I need to learn how to actually empathize with them and basically strip away my biases and what I think is right and wrong to say like, how do I play them as an understudy? So when they're in this situation and they're doing these things, here's what I'm worried about. Here's what I want to get to. Here's what value means to me. And so you start to realize that this is more of and again, as an engineer, this is a very hard thing to realize, but this is where you get to the emotional part and the social part, as opposed to just the functional part. Because part of this is like, I don't want to lose my job. I want to actually look like I know what I'm doing. Those are all really important aspects to a product. And at the same time, you've got to translate it back to what do you do to actually cause that?
Yeah, I think this is one thing that is skipped over too. Like when people answer the questions, it's very logical. That emotional stuff is not included. So oftentimes if like somebody's talking to me and I notice that they're either trying to skip over the question or they're looking frustrated or there's some kind of emotion coming out, then I'm like, we should talk about this a little bit more.
Yeah,
Or they
yeah.
get really excited about something, right?
That's why I always say in the interviews, what you want to do is dig for the energy.
Dig for the energy. I love that.
Where's the
Yeah.
energy that they have, and how do you see that? And how do you find it? And so as an engineer, I think of functional energy as very mechanical. It's about steps and time and process and resources. It's very, very logical, right? Emotional is actually way more like electrical engineering, and it's got positive emotion, it's got negative emotion, it builds up, it actually dissipates, it much behaves like electrical engineering. And social, like how do I want to look, is literally about much like chemistry, the different bonds you have between how do I want to look when I drive this car, right? And most people say, I bought the car because I got a deal on it. But when you start to realize, like, I'm better than this. Like, what do you mean you're better than this? It's like, well, I've got a promotion, I got this, and I feel like I shouldn't be driving this
deserve
car
it,
anymore.
right? Yeah.
Right. I deserve it. And so you start to realize that's an emotional piece. And you realize like that's one of the components that are there that realize that build the context to realize like when your car does not match who you are, it's kind of like, okay, there's a gap and you're kind of like,
I need to fill that gap.
well,
Yeah.
the thing is like it's like they can say like it's time for a new car. I don't know why. Like there's nothing wrong with my car, and they literally try to drive themselves crazy. But they start to realize emotionally, it's like I'm better than this.
Yeah.
It's like a backpack. Like you go from a backpack to a brief. It's like at some point I'm not in school anymore. I'm not in college anymore. Like I'm a
Yeah.
professional.
Bob, have you read the book Alchemy?
Yes. Or I've listened to it. Yes.
Okay. So that got me thinking that there is way more emotion that in B2B than we give
Oh
it
my God.
credit than we give credit to it. So I started talking to people, and again, people are like, no, people are logical. It's B2B. They're not logical. They are people.
So let me ask this. Tell me a story where somebody switched a bank that was not emotional. Because nobody really wants to switch banks. That like there's just no reason to switch bank. It might be a little bit of
Right.
margin
Or
whatever.
dentists
Or
or
dentist. And you start
doctors.
to
Yeah.
realize that it turns out that all of these things have such big emotion to it of like, I felt like these people were going to help and support me. And you start to realize like, well, why didn't you even talk to your old bank? It's like, yeah, because they would have actually judged me for it. And you're like, and ultimately, could the old bank given you a better rate? Probably, but I'm willing to pay more because I have people who are on my team. You're like, wait, what? And so you start to realize that most people try to boil it down to dollars and cents. And what I'll tell you is the war to really win is to understand the social and emotional pieces and the trade-offs that people are willing to make around that.
This was fire, what you just said.
Yeah.
I've been waiting to, like, this is what I've sort of known on the inside, felt, right? It's feelings after all. But nobody seems to be talking about the emotional, the social, and yet it is so important.
But the other part is to realize that emotion is caused. And so what happens is lots of times we get emotions, but we were afraid of them because people just have them. We don't realize that things cause them.
Yeah.
Things cause you to have confidence, right?
Yeah.
And so part of it is to realize like, how did you get confident? Like they'll say, I had this, boy, I gained a lot of confidence. Well, what happened? And they're like, well, at some point, like,
well, I talked to Bob about
so one of the things I did is I was doing an interview with somebody and they basically said they had 4 different salespeople, right? And as they talk to it, I think it's in the book. And we talk about this aspect of where they're like, I have 4 people that I got quotes from. And I'm like, all right, well, how'd you eliminate? Well, the first 2 I eliminated because at some point when they came in, they just told me who they were, what they did, what we could do for them and who they work for. Like they were trying to impress us about everything. They didn't ask me anything about my business. So the first thing is I included the people who basically asked me about my business, and they didn't actually have a solution for me. They wanted to learn about me and my business first. The second thing is that when they came back, they gave me actually 2 or 3 options, and they had to educate me about what the options were, which made me feel way smarter about what I was buying. The third thing is that they were responsive, but not too responsive. And I was like, what do you mean too responsive? Well, here's the thing is if I emailed them, they emailed right back. I was worried whether it was a bot or whether it was literally they're sitting around waiting. So I wanted to delay, but it couldn't be like more than 24 hours, but it had to be longer than an hour because if they were too responsive, it just made me feel like there was a lot of waste there. I'm like, okay. And the last thing, which was so interesting, was as I said, how did you pick? I said, I picked when I basically told the salesperson I knew there was something they couldn't do, and they were willing to tell me no, that they had to go somewhere else. And that's when they closed me. And I was like, how many salespeople know the fact is one is don't tell them about you, talk about the buyer, right? Two, basically be responsive. Three, bring back options to educate them. And four, figure out something you can tell them no. We did this for this one company, and it literally gave a 30% increase, 38% increase in sales and closing rate. Just by actually understanding like what causes people to pick you. And nobody's actually spent the time to think about that stuff. And it's, again, very emotional.
You know what I think? I think my coming in and doing this customer research actually ends up creating a tighter bond for some of these startup companies because
Yes.
people, by the way, love talking about themselves, right?
Yes.
They love it when you ask about, because a lot of my initial questions are like, what are you doing at work? What's your day-to-day like? Because
Yep.
I'm starting from scratch with
Yeah, that's
many
right.
of these industries, right? They love that. They like they're like, how far do you want me to go? And
Right.
I'm like, well, you know, we on our calendars, we only have an hour, but
But I would tell you is that this is the thing is I have people saying like, we can do this in 20 minutes. I'm like, no, you get the functional stuff in 20 minutes. You get the emotional stuff in an hour. At night, like I'll tell you, if you can have people on for 90 minutes, they're going to tell you they'll let, and they're so appreciative because they really haven't connected the dots of why this has added so much value to their business.
Yeah. I honestly don't know why companies come at it from a perspective of like, oh, we don't want to bother our customers. Well,
Yeah.
because you've been bothering them with like, you know, product feature questions forever. So stop bothering them and actually have empathy for them and have a good conversation.
My experience is that's usually the salespeople who say we don't want to bother them because they don't want to undo the sale.
Yes.
And the other part is they don't want to have the salespeople don't want you to have this conversation because they think they know like my favorite is let me go interview the salesperson of why they think this person bought and then go answer the real person. And to be honest, they're two different stories. That's the craziest part is like the salespeople miss usually half or three quarters of all the stuff that happens behind the scenes. And the sales and the person buying will tell you all the stuff that happened behind the scenes after you've closed. And so this is where you kind of get all the stuff of like, oh, let me give you this template because this is going to help you make the case internally. It's like crazy.
Yeah. I think salespeople do ask good questions. Like they will find out objections, right? Because they get them during sales conversations. So it's not like I'm going back to a customer and asking like, well, what were you worried about? Because sales actually gets the worries, like they talk through that. So I think they do have a piece of this. They don't have the full piece.
The other part to realize is like when the first interaction with the customer, 9 times out of 10, they don't know what they want. They have to learn what they want. And so the thing is it's an evolving process. And so this is more of a reflective of now let's look at the process you just created to buy this thing.
Yeah.
Help us understand how you do it. And then how do we actually align the sales process to actually help people buy as opposed to actually help us sell?
Yes. That's the goal. Wait, I before we run out of time, I have to ask you this question, Bob, because the Jobs to Be Done handbook is from 2014.
Yeah.
Okay. So what has changed, if anything, about the way you think about and apply jobs to be done?
So I always thought of this as like the first step in my product process, how I build product. And so to be honest, I thought it was really more about product, but it turns out that this actually is applicable. I worked with Clay Christensen and we ended up writing a book called Competing Against Luck. I was kind of the researcher behind that book, but Clay turned it into a theory. And so I recently basically have written a book around, I've studied for 15 years, what causes somebody to say, today's the day I'm going to leave this company and go to that company. And so it's using the framework to think about people as the product. And ultimately, what progress are you trying to make in that employees hire companies more than companies hire employees? And so how do we actually reframe that whole process of doing that? And so to me, what's changed is it's way more applicable in a much wider array of things where I would say back in 2014, it was geared towards product and product only. And so, I mean, I'm using it right now. So I have a couple of new topics I'm on. One is how to find your life partner. Like, how do you actually choose to say who your life partner is and what's the process by which to do that? Because at some point in time, there's many people trying it, but there's very few people being successful at it. And so I've been studying basically very successful people. And then to be honest, I'm also analyzing churn, like what causes you to get divorced.
That's a
And so
big
between the
one.
two,
Yeah.
I can literally help people find each other and help people basically stay together longer.
That is fascinating. You're
So
really taking this theory and applying it across different life aspects.
it is. So I've done it for college. I've done it for careers. I'm doing it for houses. I'm doing it for I'm doing it for partners, and then the other one I'm doing is religion. So I've been interviewing now for about 7.5 years on this one, which is what causes people to switch a religion, so you can understand what are people actually looking for in religion. And what you start to realize is formalized religion has basically almost halved in the last 20 years. And the biggest competitors to organized religion are places like CrossFit and SoulCycle. And when you start to analyze what they do, they give you a community, they help you be stronger, you help other people be stronger. They do a lot of things that church does without any of the rhetoric. And so it's a very interesting kind of way to look at it and think about it differently.
I've talked to folks that are not religious, and they're like, I don't need religion in my life because I can be spiritual in other ways, like cycling, for example,
That's
or
right.
something like that.
But here's the thing is, what happens when somebody dies? What happens when you want to get married? What happens when there's like, you start to realize that it can do some of the things, but not all of them. And you start to realize there's some really big aspects around it that I think that we need to think about as a society. And so that's so I'm moving more to societal things to see if I can actually just help us as a society get better, make progress.
I really also wanted to ask you about AI. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that I'm talking about and trying to push out, just have conversations around is this idea of like, what are we losing in the context of AI and automation? We're gaining a lot. We're getting faster with a lot of stuff, right? We're able to do things.
So this is where I have a problem, because most people are trying to become more and more efficient without necessarily understanding being effective. And so there's three things I want to say. One is if we think of AI right now is like 1996 for the web, right? I mean, we're 3 or 4 years into it. We've got some pieces around it, but we've got a long way to go on this thing. The other part is people are worried about people's jobs. And back when I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and what you started to realize is they had this thing when I worked at Ford called the typing pool. And it's where you sent everything to be turned into a contract, or anything that had to be formal notes, you had to basically send it to the typing pool. And when word processors came along, it was like, what's going to happen to the typing pool? Like, those people are going to be out of work. Well, it turns out that those people actually got way better jobs. And so my thing is like, and the way Clay would think about it is we want people to work at the top of their profession. And so what I think part of the problem is we're trying to get AI to do way more sophisticated things. What we should be getting AI to do is actually get the low end stuff off of our plate that allow us to still do the deep thinking we need to do. The problem is a lot of people are so used to doing the mechanical work, like copywriting, and that they don't understand that the hardest part is the thinking part.
Yeah.
And so all of us need to be thinking more, because AI can't think, right? And so ultimately it's to do research. Like, I love AI to basically say, all right, help me understand what's going on with this thing. And it can synthesize so much information so quickly to help me digest it. But it's still, what do I do with it, right? And so it's that thing is, and what you start to realize is the other problem with AI to me right now is it's a probability model. It's not a causal model. Meaning it looks at what's the most probable next word based on what everybody else has said, which is a really big, I think, loophole. Because the reality is like, when I have the word easy and I have now 15 different definitions of easy, and they see the next probable word is easy, but they don't actually have the next real depth of information. So like, people have tried to actually say, can I do AI to do the questions? Can I have AI do a jobs interview? And the reality is like, I can't even have it summarize an interview that I've done, because it literally misses all the subtle points, because it's all about the definition part that it's missing.
That is such a great point. And
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's not good enough yet.
I get it. It's 1996 web.
Yeah.
So yeah. Do you think it'll ever get to a point where it's good enough?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It'll be smarter than us at some point, because think of it as like, I think of it's doing first order work. And when we get to second order and third order work, which is where we're starting to integrate things and we're starting to actually extrapolate things. I mean, think about the human brain is like the most hard work is to think about the future. And the fact is right now is thinking about the future in probability terms. And so like if you look at how I do interviews, the probability of how many different segments I can come up with is millions, but I end up looking at it and saying there's only 5. And so it's the ability to synthesize down to the most relevant things and the most emotional things. And you start to realize that, again, AI can't detect emotion because we can't articulate emotion clearly enough yet.
Right.
And so it's on us that it'll get the functional pieces, but it's going to miss the social and emotional pieces for a while.
Yeah, which are extremely important, as we talked about. Bob, this has been awesome. You
Thank
are so wonderful to speak to. If anybody wants to find Bob, he's on LinkedIn, Bob Moesta, and I'll include the link. And the Rewired Group, if anybody wants to check out, it's therewiredgroup.com. So I'll include that link. But you're just so great. Thank you. I appreciate you for like all your knowledge.
The reason why I do this is that Clay Christensen wrote a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? And I listen to it every single year. And I have a very clear metric for me, which is the number of people I can help in a day. And so ultimately, having the ability to do a podcast allows me to actually impact all of your listeners and whoever else is there. And so I thank you for giving me the opportunity just to be able to push it out. So this is what I'm here for, and this is what I want to be doing. And I'm, when I die, the measurement is how many people have I had a chance to impact. Is really kind of the metric. So that's
a great metric. That's a great North Star. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate you so much.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Building with Buyers. New episodes drop weekly, so make sure you're following wherever you get your podcasts. You can find me on LinkedIn, Anna Furmanov. Visit my website to learn more about how to turn customer insights into positioning and messaging your buyers will understand. FurmanovMarketing.com. And don't forget to leave a review if you're loving the show.